have it at 6 o'clock, or 6:02. Public comment. Welcome guests. Any comments? Okay, continuing on. Minute approval for October 25th, 2017.
I have a couple of changes.
Go ahead.
Ready? Okay, under number 3, approval of the minutes at the beginning, it was actually 5 yeses, 1 abstention.
Oh, okay,
That's good catch.
yeah.
Okay, and then at the bottom, we talked about the articles that were excluded from Brooks Academy. They were Article 41, 65, and number 30. There were
That's
3
not
of them.
what we said, but that's what I thought.
There were 3 of them.
Okay.
And then on the 3rd page, the last thing, number 8, again, it was a vote of 5 and 1 abstention.
Which one?
The last
Last page.
motion on the last page, number 8.
Somebody didn't want to abstain? I
No,
mean, somebody
yes.
wanted to abstain?
Cindy was
Yeah, Cindy
abstaining that
was-
night.
Yeah, Cindy abstained.
Am I able to
From
vote on
from-
minutes tonight?
Absolutely, if you, as long as you have that
Yep.
certificate downstairs.
Yeah.
Okay.
She wasn't not voting that night.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay? Those are my changes. I make a motion to accept the minutes of October 25th, 2017 with the changes that I just mentioned.
I'll second. I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Yeah, I'd like to abstain just
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I haven't had a
me
chance to review it.
Okay. New business. Dave Spitz.
Hi, I know most of you, not all of you, but most of you. I'm now the chair of the Brooks Academy Museum Commission, for better or worse. And if I say anything wrong, Peggy Rose will tell me. So, looking at your agenda, thank you very much for putting me first. I don't think I'm going to take a lot of your time. I've been chair since September. I'm not up to speed on the museum and its needs, but I have been talking to people and finding out some of the things that are needed. And I also believe there are 2 existing CPC articles. If there's more than that or less than that, I'm not aware of that.
Well, there's 2 plus the 3rd one is the study. So there's 3 articles that have funds remaining.
Okay, then I only picked up 2 of them going back to 2008. So there might,
2007,
okay, I
Article
missed
41
2007.
has 26,000 in it.
Is that for interior?
It just said historic restoration. I don't remember.
Okay, the 2008 was for exterior,
Yep.
and that was $75,000. 21,000 was spent mostly on windows, and there's 53,000 remaining.
Yep.
The study, 2014, is for $30,000. So I can't tell you a whole lot. What I can tell you is, we're not asking for any new money. We'd be glad to just keep what we got. But I'm available to answer any questions, and because I don't know where this committee is at regarding these 3 articles.
Okay, I'll open it up to the board. Joe? Nothing right now, thank you.
David, just refresh my recollection. The issue here was that these were articles that we were going to request that the money be returned to us
Rescinded. That's correct.
because of the time. So I think I would like to ask David why these articles are still active and why the funds have not as yet been spent.
Yeah, and I can only give you very limited answers to that. It's a good question, but one of the study is 2014. That's not a long time. So in my mind, there shouldn't be any question about that one. There is a need. There is the first floor is actively used. There are possibilities for the basement and for the second floor. If use of the second floor might require an elevator or some other means, there's a number of questions related to that, and that study is absolutely what's needed to do that. Why it hasn't been spent between 2014 and 2017, I can't tell you. As far as the 2008 article, the windows were done. I guess there was a change in circumstances. I can't tell you anything more about why the rest of that money has not been spent. Jim, that's all I can tell you right now.
Okay, on the survey, do you now have plans to conduct the survey, and what would the timing be on completing that?
Okay, so like I say, I've been doing this for less than 2 months. I've spent the first month researching what we have, and my research was incomplete because I only found 2 of the 3 articles. I'm also finding out that we had a maintenance budget that is not there anymore, and I believe that's been absorbed into the highway overall maintenance budget through Sean Libby, so I've got to find that out. But in looking at this and talking to Janet Cassidy, who's the director under the Historical Society, she's the one who suggested we needed an elevator. Others have suggested that we need the second floor and the basement. So one of my top priorities is getting this study started. I haven't done anything on that yet. I would say that we should be able to formulate an RFP or whatever we decide to do within the next 3 months.
And what would be the length of time for the study?
I would think it could be done within a year.
Within a year. Okay, thank you, Dave.
You know, get it out there within 3 months, get somebody working on it within 6 months, a year from that. So a year and a half from tonight.
All set, Jim.
That's it.
Kathy?
Well, when Jeremy was here last speaking to us with for an annual report, he mentioned that a lot of the exterior work had been done, you know, by Public Works or other outside, just, you know, volunteering, so to speak. So there must be a list someplace of projects that need to be done or were supposed to be included in this exterior restoration, et cetera?
Jeremy is of the opinion that the work that needs to be done, such as the front portico, foundation, columns, windows, are more maintenance than restoration. I can't speak to that, but he did
Okay.
tell me that.
Okay, well, if they're more maintenance, then
I know
they
the
would not
implication
come
of
under
that.
this
I know
particular
the
funding.
implication of that.
So,
What I'm telling you is I'm a little bit handicapped tonight because I've only been able to dig out so much to this point.
okay, well, did you look at the prior applications?
I looked at the articles that were
The articles
approved.
don't really say that much.
Yeah.
All set?
Yeah.
Cindy?
No comment.
Dan?
After we review the applications that have been submitted for this year, we follow up with the projects that are outstanding and ask them for a progress report. So I'd be inclined to wait until that occurs before we decide to whatever. Gives David some 3-4 months to get caught up and get things in order.
Well,
Yeah, just a comment on that. I think our intent when we were discussing this last time was to sort of recollect money that was outstanding and not being spent so that we could reallocate it with regard to this series of applications. Waiting would not accomplish that. I mean, my sense is that, yeah, the funds have been out there for a while. They haven't been spent. You know, the Historical Society is certainly willing, you know, in the next cycle to apply for any additional funding that they feel would be helpful and apply for these same projects anew. But I think at this point, these have been out there for a long period of time, and we don't see any progress during that period of time.
Jeremy did mention that, for example, there's some second floor window or something that was in question, and that it was never the right time for it to get done between Historical Society needs in terms of what was going on and, you know, getting, you know, the paperwork and getting somebody ready to do it. The timing was off.
Right.
I think that there's been a real lack of leadership, obviously. I tried to go to a couple of commission meetings this summer, of which there was no agendas, no minutes, no nothing posted for months and months and months.
Right.
So I know that
I'm
there
aware of
was,
that.
there was a big, zero going on. So I'm of the opinion that I would be willing to let these kind of sit for a while longer, but with a time frame.
That is wonderful as far as I'm concerned. I'm a bit handicapped. I've talked to Sean Libby, I've talked to Jeremy. I'm starting to get the information. If the money gets taken back, and boy, if I was in your shoes, I would see the reason to do so. Okay, then I can't use anything until the next cycle. There may be, I don't think there's $50,000 needs that I can justify, but there could easily be 10 or 20. Those could get done this year.
But I'd like to see a time frame. I'd like to see estimates. I'd like you to come in and say, it's going to cost us this because this is exactly what I've got, figured out.
I think I already got pinned down on the study as far as the timeline for that. And I'm familiar enough with that type of work that I was able to give you a quick answer. I can give you an answer on the others, but not tonight.
Jim?
Okay, David, could you give us the answer on all of the others by our first meeting in January when we begin our deliberations and start assigning funds to the various projects?
That's a very reasonable time for me to shoot for. If I can't by then, I'm not going to argue with you.
Yeah, well, then I would be open to postponing action until our first meeting in January so that David could come back, we could consider it at that point in time, and if we are going to, call the funds back, then we're doing it in a timely manner in order to reallocate it to current applications.
Put that in the form of a motion.
Okay, yeah, I make that in the form of the motion. Did you get it, Jan?
No.
Okay. Okay, what I would like to do is, I move that we postpone action on these matters, on the recall of funds from the Harwich Historical Society,
No, it's the Brooks Academy
for the-
Museum Commission.
the Brooks Academy, thank you very much, Kathy.
Give him the article number.
From the Brooks Academy Museum Commission, that we postpone our decision until our first meeting in January.
Jim, include the two article
Regarding
numbers,
the
please.
articles, Article 41.
Regarding Article 41, 30, and 65.
I second.
Is it 39 or 30?
30. It's 30.
It's 30.
And 65?
I can give you the years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kathy just seconded.
And put that up there
Oh,
from
so-
Until our first meeting in January. Do we have a date for that yet, Jan?
the calendar isn't available, but we have set, for location, we have set January 4th.
Well, why don't we just make the motion for our first meeting in
For
January?
the first meeting in January. Okay, motion's on the floor, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Thank you for the reprieve. I'll be back in January.
Hi, Peggy Rose. If I can just make a couple of comments to Kathy's concern about our lack of meetings. Our chair resigned in May. We had not, you kind of depend. Maybe it was not due diligence on the rest of the committees. We should have been a little more due diligent, but you kind of expect the chair to set the pace, the agenda, and what have you. And he didn't. He resigned in May. Don Howell will tell you, and so that we were down to 3 members of a 5-member board at that point. And Don Howell will tell you I stalked him every place I saw him this summer, including the Housing with Love walk from the Children's Center up to First Congo Church, saying we need some help, we need some help. And he kept saying, yes, Peg, I know you do, I know you do. But of course, they're on the interview, because Selectmen's interview committee was, was only a 2-person committee as well. And we weren't quite up at the top of the food chain for appointments, but thankfully, yes, we do. And we also had, as most of you know, a change in administration at the Historical Society. So it was kind of like a perfect, an almost perfect storm. But now, with David at the helm, you all know David, and you know how precise his work is. I am sure we are back on track. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next, have we taken a look at the financial statements for funding for the CPC? Are there any questions for the finance director?
I'm not sure people know what they're looking at. Can you,
I can read a spit.
As I understand these numbers.
Yep.
We have, as of October 24th of 2017, $2,732,809 available for funding projects.
That's great.
The current requests that we have on hand total $3,526,368. What I'm not understanding is what the last four figures represent. That total $2,606,368.
That's a great cue in, if I'm entitled. Christopher Clark, I'm the town administrator here in the community. What I was asked to do by the chair was to see if we could prioritize the town requests. So I very specifically put in there town administrator recommendation. I kind of abbreviated it, but it's a town administrator recommendation. And because we have available as of today $2.7 million, I came up with a funding plan of $2.6 million. So what I did was made the necessary reductions from my perspective on town requests, and then I do have a couple other suggestions. If you like, I'm happy to kind of walk through
Sure.
the form and just show you how I have it laid out. If that makes sense. I know this is, I think, a form that's a little bit newer to most folks on this committee, but it is a form that I have been using with the selectmen for 3 years now. So as you go through, you'll see the various requests, and then on the first page, you'll see the town administrator recommendations column. You will see that I also have a selectmen CPC column. So once you guys do your official voting, we'll put in the official numbers that you guys have. So this is just really a preliminary working document for me to try to find ways to fund different things. And my responsibility is for the whole town and not necessarily just CPC. So you will see some of the elements in here that I have for the Capital Outlay Committee. But just to kind of work down the form and the requests, and I will just briefly go through, I'm just going to kind of highlight these. And what I did on the funding source, you can see, just to take the first one here, Albro House status assessment. It says CPC historic, and then the funding is $2,500. I might just run down these, and then I'll go through what the boxes mean at the end. So on the cemetery, the Mount Pleasant Cemetery, that's historic, $47,000. That is recommended to be funds available to cover that expense. The basement construction of public record storage, it's historic, $62,000. There are available funds to fund that as well. Whether you guys choose to fund them or not is not really relevant for mine. My exercise is to make sure that I did what I said I was going to do, which was to give a priority list. On the Judah Eldridge, it was 369 was a total request under this funding plan. I have CPC would fund 319, free cash would fund 50,000. So I have that broken up a little bit. In terms of Cornelius Pond, you have 4 buckets, so I need to make sure I balance to the appropriate bucket. So you'll see some of these are split. In this case, the Cornelius Pond, that is funded, recommended to be funded, the 200,000, 25 from open space, and 125 from undesignated. The next one is under engineering, 27,000 for the Pleasant Pleasant Ave crossing lights, and that would come out of the recreation / undesignated bucket. On the library preservation, 300,000, that would come out of the historic bucket. The next one is the harbor master, who I have to say isn't thrilled with me, but I did not recommend that project from an administration standpoint. We have at least 3 grants in, and my hope is that one of the grants will hit, and we will not necessarily need to have CPC funds. I did say to him and strongly recommended to him that he come and do his presentation. I think this board needs to hear that. And if you guys decide that a portion of it may be something that we want to consider funding, then I think there will be a little bit of flexibility in this. So I just wanted to say that up front. But at least for this purpose, this exercise, I did not have sufficient funds to cover that expense. So
Chris,
I
one
did not-
question. On that specific thing, T3R, what does that mean?
I'm sorry?
It says, on my sheet, it says grant supplement.
Oh,
For what?
I was trying to do
T3R.
that as our 3rd request. So I was trying to give that a lower designation.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. And going down, let me see here, the library preservation and digitization of the Oracle newspaper, that would be from the historic bucket, 10,340. Hinckley's Pond restoration, 450,000 from open space undesignated, 150,000 from free cash, and then 75 for the improvements to the area, the walkway down, and to the bike path would be funded out of undesignated recreation. The housing trust, the creation of that, and the funding of the part-time housing coordinator, that is funded, originally was 500,000, that has also been reduced to 295. And I will explain the rationale for that as well. Page 3. On page 3, if we go down to youth and rec, the youth rec program of Brooks Park, Phase 5, comprehensive light plan, that would be funded. I kind of use rec and undesignated the same, because rec doesn't officially have its own bucket, but I just put them together just for simplicity's sake. So that is recommended to be funded. The records retention on CPC historic, 40,000, that is recommended to be funded. And the last 3, and I just wanted to, for display purposes, just show that these are not town-related, they're private applications, if you would, or non-town. And on the CDP, Community Development Partnership, Cape Housing Institute, they've recommended they've requested 10,000. I did fund that 10,000 within the allocation. On the Habitat of Cape Cod, the 300,000, I did fund that at the full level. On the Harwich Housing Authority, I have that funded at 135. I think the request was for 3 properties to be pursued, and the rationale is that they haven't spent money. I think they spent, the last time they had an allocation was in 2012. So if they had one allocation from 2012 to 2017, that I think 1 per year is probably a better mark to use. That's my judgment in terms of the recommendation. I had to make things fit. And then when you go to the final page, you can see on my summary sheet, it kind of makes things a little bit more, hopefully it makes things make a little bit more sense. So under administrative recommendations, you see on undesignated and recreation, the total of that is $1,060,000. In that bucket, we leave 23,000. In open space, 344,000 is funded. That leaves a residual of 200,387. The historic bucket has 461,000 and some change, and that leaves 99,000 available. In housing, 740 is what's contemplated to be used, and that leaves 1,000. So what I decided to do was to make sure that we balance things out. In terms of the approach that's being taken this year, that as money is received, the money goes into that account, or as money is identified to be turned back for projects that haven't been done. So that $2.7 million number will most likely be adjusted up. So there will be, I believe, some room for additional maneuvering, if you would. In terms of the expectation, last year we had $400,000 came in December for the state's portion of their contribution to us. The city of Boston has been added into the mix, so I would imagine that they are going to have a fairly good drain on that money. as they drop that. But I think it's probably safe to assume that we would get somewhere between 100 and 200,000 would be coming in, hopefully prior to January 1st. So I think that there is some room for additional maneuver. In terms of the only real category I saw that was a significant challenge is just historic, because there weren't enough requests for the available money within that bucket. So that 99,000 probably would be carried forward without additional requests coming in. Hopefully I didn't speak too quickly or go too fast for folks, but more than happy to take questions.
I'll start. Question for you. Is the debt service, the land bank debt service, included anywhere on this number?
Yes, well,
I know it's on the sheet, the spreadsheet, but on your capital sheet here, is that included?
it would,
It is,
but the balances, that available balances, subtract that number out first.
Okay. All right.
Could you repeat that?
So, to come up with the, on the last page of the large
Available
document,
funds.
you see what the balances that were available in each bucket. And those numbers were obtained from taking, what was the balance at the end of the fiscal year? What was appropriated at town meeting? What is the debt that's going to be incurred in 2019? And it subtracts that from that.
Okay, so
So-
that figure is net of
That's
the land
correct.
bank.
Net.
All right.
Open up to the board. Cindy?
No, thank you, that's very helpful.
you're very welcome.
Dan?
It's nice to see some numbers.
Yes, it is.
I'm good.
No questions at this time.
Joe? Good, thank you. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
the presentation.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having us.
Okay, we shall begin. Historic Preservation, Brooks Free Library.
Good evening.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. I'm Mary Ward. I currently chair the Board of Trustees at Brooks Library, and I'm here this evening with a number of other trustees and with Sean Libby, who is the project manager for the preservation project. I know that you've gone through the application and understand the situation that we find ourselves in. And so the trustees are here tonight to advocate for additional funding for the completion of the project that was voted by the town at last town meeting. We have found that in the course of two bid processes, the amounts of bids came in significantly over the funds that we have had available, and I'll have Sean speak to that. And there may be a few reasons for that. The timing of the length of time that it took to get the first bid out. Secondly, the fact that a lot of the work that's involved in this project has to be done in weather that's over 60 degrees at night, I believe. Third, because it's a preservation project and there's specific skills involved in this preservation work for the crews that will come on board. They may have to come from off Cape, which involves whoever receives the contract or dealing with the people that will work on the project that way. And I think there was one other specific. And I think we ran up against, but I'll have Sean speak to this, we ran up against the timing of the bids, perhaps hitting the public at a time of the year when construction projects had already been scheduled. So is there anything you'd like to add to that? It went out in April, is that the first one?
Right. We actually went out to bid in March with the bid results coming back April 27th for the first round. And during that first round, the bids were much higher than the original estimate. And we went back to the architect to ask why, and he came back with a lot of the guesses that Mary just said. But essentially, we range anywhere from $636,000 to $776,000 for the project, and we only funded $540,000. to include architect fees. These prices was just for the restoration period. Seeing that, we decided to try to go out to bid again and break the project up into sections to see if we could maybe afford to do just the front and the side, or the front and the back and leave the side out. So we broke it up into a base bid, which would include the front, and then alternates, which is something that the contractor could say, okay, if I have to do the back, I'll add this much to it. We only had one bidder come back, and that was in June. The one bidder, if you add up all the alternates in the base bid, came in at $1,008,634. So by breaking it up, and we thought we'd save money, it was actually going to cost us about $400,000 more. Seeing that, we talked to the architect, and we came to the Board of Selectmen and asked to reject that one bid based on the cost, and to come to the realization that we're going to need more money to do this project. Obviously, our estimate was low. The economy is high. Construction's booming, and for all those other reasons that Mary talked about, construction in the summer in Cape Cod is expensive.
And so the scope of the work that has to be done, the project itself hasn't changed, the cost of the project has changed. So all of the processes that we went through, all of the certificates and letters of support and vote by the town, the scope of the documentation that had to be obtained for this project to go through, it's all the same. The work is the same. But unfortunately, we're going to have to find additional funding to get this project done. And the longer we wait, the more difficult it's going to be. We all know this is a culturally and historically significant building, and the trustees are absolutely dedicated to seeing this project come to completion. It is, hopefully CPC will be the source of our funding, but, if an article has to go to town meeting, then, we'd have to go that route. But we know that you understand the project very well because you supported it, as did all the other boards and committees, when it was sent to town meeting for approval, which it was. So everybody's on board that the work needs to be done. But it has taken 3 years to get to this point. And so just the cost of the work has just escalated. So we're looking for a target of $300,000. I understand that we wouldn't be going out to bid again until the spring.
Correct.
Because there are regulations regarding how far in advance you need to go out. You can go out to bid.
By law, we can't find anything to allow us to hold a bid longer than 30 days past the bid date. So since this has to be approved at town meeting, no matter which way it goes, we can't go out to bid before that, 30 days before town meeting.
We did have some funds. In the application you saw that we had some funds. I believe they've all been two amounts, about a little over $39,000 that had been granted to us before. We first began asking for funds from CPC, as you know, back in 2011, and we were granted a certain amount of money, and whatever work could be done in-house was done. But then the historic preservation expertise wasn't there to continue. And rightfully, the CPC had supported us with $25,000, I believe, for the assessment, which was done by this very well-known architectural firm. And so the process began once we had the assessment. So we have about $39,000, if you see in that page, that Ginny actually has put this into a spreadsheet. And that, with the balance of what is available after the architects are paid, it's somewhere around $529, $530, but it's not enough. Now, what will it be specifically? We don't know. We're not going to be able to.
We just don't want to come back again.
We don't want to have to come back again. So we based on what we're seeing from the previous bids, I believe, we're giving you a target number, and of course, anything that wasn't needed would be returned. But we don't want to find ourselves in the position of saying, we don't want to make it so narrow that we're another $75,000 off, or another $100,000 off. So that's where we are. But nothing need, all of the approval processes remain in place. It is the same exact project with the scope of work that was determined, the specs that have been reviewed. Everything is, that part of it is ready to go. It's just the funding. And we find ourselves, unfortunately, it's very disappointing that we find ourselves in this situation, but it is where we are. So we're happy to, if there are any questions, concerns.
Okay, we'll open the discussion up to the board. Cindy?
I would say that the only concern is that the 300,000 is a guess, and I understand your predicament, but we typically require some.
The base, what we're using is the basis of our past bids, which range from $640,000 to $1,008,000. So we're looking for somewhere in the middle.
Dan?
I have no questions.
Kathy?
Couple things. I took a look, well, number one, do you still have confidence in the architect? I mean, given that the bid was so off? I mean, it's kind of significant. I mean, I would assume that they would know enough to consider, the time of year that it would have to be done, and that it, we're on the Cape, and the housing costs and that kind of thing.
I do, and based on bid bust all over the Cape this summer, it's happening everywhere, not just this town, not just our projects, across the Cape. Construction's booming and the prices have gone up.
Okay, I happened to look through the report again when I was reviewing the application, and the report really sort of differentiates between maintenance stuff and preservation stuff. And I was just curious as to whether any of the maintenance items had been addressed so far, like, since the report's been out for a couple of years now, like gutters being reconnected, power washing of the portico, repointing of brickwork, sash work. I mean, has any of that stuff been done?
Some of that has been, but the majority of it wasn't maintenance, it was preservation, as dictated in there because the paint is over 100 years old. Gutters have been cleaned and repaired, yes.
And what about this, like, sash work and stuff? I mean,
Now, the sash work is part of this project.
okay. All right. Well, there was different kinds of sash work. Some required just minor stuff, it seemed, from the report.
No.
Okay.
Is that?
Yeah.
Jim?
Yeah, I have a few questions, but first I'd like to just start out with a comment. I had, in a previous life, had extensive experience with public bidding on construction projects. And the law that you spoke to, in my understanding, and again, you may want to check with town council on this, is not that you cannot bid more than 30 days before, but a contractor is only legally required to hold its price for 30 days from the bid date. Now, I have had extensive experience with contractors who, by agreement with the contracting entity, have held their bids for substantially longer, in order to accommodate funding issues such as the ones that you're facing. So you may just want to check with town council on
We
that.
had checked with the Attorney General's office,
Yes.
Bob Caparelli, which is our procurement officer,
Yeah.
and he came back and said, this is the way it is.
Okay, well, that's not my experience, and I had 43 years of experience with public agencies in Boston. So, anyway, that was just a comment. My questions go to the fact that, one, there is no budget in your application, and traditionally we base our awards on a budget that is presented so that we can review it. We have no idea what the various components of the costs of the project are and how much they're estimated to cost. Usually an architect or engineer will give you that. I understand that your problems are with the bidding process and that the bids have come in substantially higher. The request that you're making is for $300,000. What if you rebid and it comes in at $1 million? How are you going to proceed at that point?
I'll be obviously, we wouldn't.
Okay, well, that's the problem for us, because we're committing funds to your project, you know, if we decide to vote, that are going to be taken away from other projects. And we have to make those decisions. And again, usually we base those decisions on a budget that we have an opportunity to review. So that's one question that I have. The second, you're talking about not bidding to the spring. So that would put us in a situation where, you know, not only would we have to make our decision, but town meeting would have to make their decision before you get a final, you know, bid price on this. And again, if it comes in substantially higher than the 540,000 plus the 300,000 that you're asking, then you have the same issue again, and you're not able to proceed. The other question that I have has to do with the issue that I think has been raised quite often over the past year or 2 years. It was raised at this committee last year as to the color. And I don't know where you stand on that issue. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yes, the color is going to remain white.
Okay, because there was even an article in the Cape Cod Chronicle where one of our selectmen said, it doesn't make any difference because it's only maintenance. Well, if it's only maintenance, then it's not eligible for community preservation funds. And that's a direct
Well,
quote from the Cape Cod Chronicle. So, you know, it's an issue that I have that's of great concern to me. The second thing is that...
Could we go back to that one when you're...
Okay. Well, if you want to respond to that now.
I may have lost you a little bit there. You're talking about the painting of the building.
The color of the building.
The color of the building will be the same as it, the building will look the same as it did in 1998 when we completed the addition and the restoration project. The whole building is white. And the trustees have decided to keep it that color for uniformity and the look. It also won a Massachusetts Historic Preservation Award for the way that construction project was handled and how the paint tied the entire building together. Now, the wood underneath at this point, which is, you know, the paint is peeling. This goes back, the paint is peeling, the wood underneath, I think on one building it's 137 years old, and the other building's 162 years old. And the recommendation is that, you know, after 100 years, that paint needs to be chemically stripped, and, you know, the wood needs to be looked at, and then before it's, you know, and treated so that the paint will adhere to the wood going forward. It's one of the reasons why the assessment took place in the first place in 2014 is because everyone was concerned, how many times are we going to paint this building? Are we going to paint it every 5 years? Are we going to paint it, you know, every 10 years? Or are we going to find the reason why the paint is failing? And it's because of being I believe some of it is because of it's being overly painted, and now you can't get it to adhere properly. In any event, the chemical stripping will solve that issue. Now, that's not, in order to preserve the wood underneath, we need to do the chemical stripping, which meets with the Department of Interior's standards for treating historic buildings. And we have that documentation, that process is appropriate for a building of that age, the two sections that are so old that we're talking about here tonight.
Okay, and I understand all that. My question only went to the color, because last year when you came before us, there was controversy with regard to the color. There had been controversy in discussions with the Board of Selectmen, and there was that article in the Cape Cod Chronicle where one of the selectmen said it doesn't make any difference, it's only maintenance.
And then we went in front of the Historic Commission, and they approved to remain the same color as of...
Okay, and that was going to be my next question. So you have now answered that question for me. Thank you.
When we spoke to the Historic Commission about the project, they asked that we would do the testing for the original paint colors. And that was a $6,000 piece of our project. We agreed to that because it's significant to keep that historic record for that building, whether or not you're going to change the color or not. At some point, this was or not at some point, but this seemed to be the opportunity to do that. Right now, we had the opportunity to do it, they requested it, and the question was left open about, would we consider different colors and so forth. However, the trustees have decided to keep it white, and the historic district understands that unless we want to change the color, that we don't have to get approval to keep it white.
Okay, thank you very much. That answers my question on that. Mary, did you want to make a comment before I go on to my next question?
Sure. Mary Maslowski, Chair of the Historic District Historical Commission. I can just clarify what had actually happened. The Board of Trustees, through the Selectmen, with Mr. Libby, came before the Historic Commission on a certificate of appropriateness before the last project in the spring. I think it was. Joe may remember the time frame of it. And at the time, we were informed that we, through opinion of legal counsel, we didn't have really a say in the color. So understanding that we didn't have purview over the color at that time, the Historic Commission did vote to approve the project and granted a certificate of appropriateness as it was proposed at the time, the work being done to have the building repainted white. So just to clarify, that is what happened earlier this year.
Okay, thank you,
Okay,
Mary.
before we go any further, I'd like any questions from the board or from the audience directed through the chair, please.
Okay, certainly, David. I just have one more question. I thought I saw in your application, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have applied for capital funds through the town?
The project is on the capital outlay plan,
Okay.
as was the project originally.
And
they-
where does that stand at this time?
We've
They
just,
have not voted.
yeah, they have not
haven't voted? Okay, so it's still just under consideration.
It's under consideration. They see this funding source as likely to be our CPC.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now, may I just follow up for may
Go
I
ahead.
follow up?
Go ahead.
You're talking about, for the 300,000, if that's our target figure, and we can't be more specific, we really need to get to a breakout of what that $300,000 would cost. It really becomes part of the total project money, so that I'm just trying to go back to make sure that we give you all the information that you
Well,
need.
David, may I?
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm traditionally used to seeing an architect's estimate that would detail the various components of the project and assign an estimated cost to that. And I did not see that in your application.
That is correct.
Okay.
It was done for the last project,
But it was in the
not
last
this.
project's application.
But
that
it's not
doesn't-
in this application, and
Okay.
this is the application that I'm reviewing tonight.
Okay. So that's a piece of information that needs to be forthcoming
Yes,
to make it
if
complete.
you could get that to us, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Jim, you all set?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Go.
So I don't think I'm going to belabor anything, but I want to pick up on Jim's last question, because it's similar to my question, and I want to make sure we're on the same page. And my question relates to what's written in your application on page 4 under current plan of action. I do think this is what Jim was asking, but I want to make sure. Under that statement, it says, "The library submitted a request to place the additional funding for this project on the FY19 capital plan, though too early for a formal vote at their August 21st, 2017 meeting. The Board of Selectmen indicated their support for the request for additional funding so the work could be completed." Is that what you said is still up in the air?
Yes.
And will that appear on this
Yes.
billboard?
Yes.
Okay, so, because it's not referenced anywhere, does that mean, well,
Go ahead.
thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, through you to anybody, how much is this going to change in relation to everything else that's going on? I was a little bit surprised to not see the connection between the two funding sources.
Because of the amount of money in the project, we were requested to submit it to capital outlay. And so they understand the need for the money, they understand the project because they've been through this before. So it is on the plan,
I did not bring the capital outlay.
I'm sorry, if Chris were here, he might be able to give us a little bit more information. But yes, it is on your plan.
Thank you.
Kathy?
Just one quick question. How long is the paint supposed to last, the new paint, once it's on the chemically stripped bare wood? I mean, are we looking at
Great question.
2
I'm not a
years,
painter.
3 years, 5 years, 10 years? I mean,
You're not gonna get an estimate from that?
no. Painter. I forgot.
You will not get an estimate.
Okay.
Answer that question.
Well, there's a reason why we're going with this approach with the chemical stripping and so forth, so that we have a project that isn't gonna have to be revisited in 5 years. You know, we've always had a maintenance budget for painting of the library with someone in town does one part of the library at one part of the year and has been working his way around the building. But that's just, you know, putting a coat, that is not solving any paint issues or any preservation issues. But so it has been maintained in the sense that over the years it has been painted side by side, you know, piece by piece. But that's not what we are looking at here, right? Now, you can tell just by looking at the building, we're just getting some, you know, if this gets approved and we go forward, we have extra funding, we're still looking at June to even start this project. So, you know, it just is deteriorating, and it is, it's on the state register of historic places within the historic district. It's, cornerstone of the historic district. So we're concerned.
Dan?
When the consulting engineer came and presented to us for the original application, with the chemical stripping and repainting, I asked him, how much will this extend the useful life of the library? And he said it'd be 100 years, which makes it a capital expenditure and not maintenance.
This is not a maintenance project.
No.
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 Kathy?
No, I mean, and just my question about the painting, I mean, I know it's hard to say, but I mean, if the taxpayers are gonna, be allocating over $800,000 for the building, I know a lot of it's preservation, but they're gonna wanna know if it's gonna last a while.
I would hope so.
Or the budget
Well, we'll
for
get-
painting is gonna
We can get
continue
more
on.
specific feedback about that from the architects, but
He's not going to give a time period either.
He's not.
But obviously, this is our, our best hope, is to extend it as long as possible, to cure some of the issues that are going on underneath that peeling paint and some of the rotted wood, and hopefully, we could try to get a figure, but I'm not sure that I could guarantee that. But it's not, I can't guess that it would be 5 years, it would be extended up that far.
Mr. Kroll?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Bill Kroll, member of the Brooks Library Board of Trustees since 1980. So it's been 37 years I've been on the board, and I was in charge of maintaining this building for at least 2 or 3 of the decades in question. And what we did was, if it was $5,000 a year limit, Peter Hughes's dad, Peter Hughes, would paint a section every year, and we'd try to do a side every year. And then his father passed away and passed the baton to Jack Sullivan, who's been great also, and has been painting a side as best he can every year. So we've exhausted the possibilities of maintenance here. It's now time to preserve and restore the building. I grew up in Harwich here. This is a historically significant building in town. We need to be responsible citizens and caretakers of the building, not have a repeat of Exchange Hall being torn down. I think it's imperative that we go forward with this project, and it's not a maintenance project. It is restoration and preservation of a historically significant building. I'm responsible for the many layers of paint that now won't allow another layer to adhere. We need to get down to the bare wood and get on with the project as best we can. To answer the question about how long will the new coat of paint last, we live on Cape Cod, we don't know. Mr. Nixon's a painter, he knows that we can't answer that question. We do the best we can. Thanks.
Anybody else on the board? Any other questions? Thank you very much for coming. Okay, next on the docket, we have preservation and digitalization of the Oracle newspaper. Would you identify yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Pickett. I'm the reference librarian at the Brooks Free Library. I'm here to talk about the preservation and digitization of the Harwich Oracle newspaper. This is a different version of the project that I submitted last year, for those of you that were here last year. Significantly cheaper, $10,340 total. So this project, it's fairly comprehensive. It preserves the original newspapers in archival boxes. It creates microfilm where it doesn't exist before, and it creates a digital project that's searchable. So it kind of does the three facets of preservation. And the main reason why I feel that this is important is that this is a random one that I picked up from, let's see, 1998. You'll see how it's getting yellow, it's getting fragile. Every year the newspaper deteriorates, and the more it's handled, the more dust, oils, and dirt that get on it from handling, it deteriorates further. So the best thing that you can do is preserve it, microfilm it, digitize it, so you don't have to touch it. So that is why I'm here, and that's why it's a preservation project. I was very lucky to find microfilm that I didn't know existed. It's held by a private company. The Boston Public Library did a project back many, many years ago before my time, so I wasn't aware of it. But I found that there were 22 rolls of microfilm out there of this newspaper. So that is why the price came down significantly, because it's much more expensive to digitize directly from print than from microfilm. So I was able to reconfigure the whole project, get everything digitized, get microfilm where it didn't exist, so that the whole collection is also on microfilm, include archival boxes for the preservation of the actual paper materials. And that's pretty much it. Is that clear? If you have any questions.
We'll find out. Opening to the board. Joe, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
If I'm reading the quote from the potential vendor, it looks like they're going to take the documents and they're going to film, which becomes the JPEG image, or is that microfilm, and then they convert the microfilm into JPEG, and then they convert the JPEG into PDFs? Is that, am I reading that right?
They kind of digitize the microfilm directly. There's a process called OCR, optical character recognition.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, yes, and that's what they get the digital image, and then they put that like on a hard drive, a physical hard drive, and that's the end product of that process. So they're creating microfilm where it doesn't exist, that we get to keep, plus they're making the digital product, so that there's actually hard drives that'll be searchable.
So how are they defining the digital product? Is that the PDF, or is it that interim stage of the JPEG?
It's the PDF files that you get at the end that are searchable, and it's going to be indexed by year, so you can search the entire collection or just specific years. Yeah, it's the PDF.
So did they explain why they're doing, I understand the filming and I understand the PDF part, and I get the OCR as well. I'm getting tripped up by the interim step of the JPEGs. So they're creating a medium in the JPEGs, but it's not going to last. Meaning, just in the life cycle that they've identified on this quote, you're going for microfilm, which I'm completely on board with. It's, you know, the longest lasting medium out there with, if you have magnification and light source, you know, 500 years in some cases. I see the benefit of the OCR, the optical character reading, for the PDFs. I'm just tripped up what they mean by the JPEG part of it. And I just want to make sure that as low as this is and the great work that you've done, is that an additional cost that doesn't necessarily need to be there? And I ask that because I've worked with other vendors on similar projects, and I haven't seen that interim step of the JPEG. So I don't know that it's necessarily something you can address tonight, but I'd just be curious as to if they could provide some sort of further explanation as to that whole life cycle process of going from filming to optical character read. Did that make sense at all?
Yeah, I
'Cause
guess.
it sounded good in my head, I just want to make sure I'm conveying it.
Yeah, I think, you know, the JPEG is when they're actually taking that image, and then they need that JPEG, I think, to do the OCR. I think they need that. Like, that's why they do that in between. I think it's how they get the image to do the OCR.
Okay.
And the PDFs are kind of what works with Adobe Acrobat.
So that part makes complete sense to me,
Yeah,
especially this
but it's the
search
actual
capability.
images that they need to do the OCR from. It's like the image that it's searching. It uses that software to pick it up, if that makes sense.
I'm going to interject just a moment here. Please define what a JPEG is.
I couldn't tell you, I used to know what the acronym is, but JPEG is one of 4 different formats that is on your computer. It's a photograph, for lack of a better word. And so, in most instances, OCR is something that can be done with most standard photocopiers nowadays, where when you scan the document, you code it to be a PDF. Don't ask me to, something to do with Adobe. Believe it or not, I work with this stuff every day, but when you scan to PDF, the scan automatically can be coded to have the optical character read capability. So for me, I understand the filming part of it, and I've done projects where they've done microfilming. So you take that document there and you put it on microfilm. It's that interim step of creating a photograph, because the photograph may not be the only thing they need to get the PDF. I'm just a little bit surprised at how the vendor's approaching it. Or, I shouldn't say the vendor, perhaps, one particular product expert. There we go.
Okay.
I think it's more in how it was written up. This is a very reputable vendor, New England Micrographics. It's kind of known as the place where everyone sends their stuff to get microfilmed. Ask anybody who's done microfilming, they'll probably heard of New England Micrographics. They have this huge warehouse, and they just have an amazing collection there. So I just spent a lot of time with this particular person, Michael Monahan, back and forth, making sure this is exactly what I was asking for, that the originals wouldn't be damaged,
Sure.
exactly what the project was, exactly what we would get, because I'm skeptical too. I wanted to make sure that this quote was entirely accurate. Every single thing that, I questioned him on, he came back and responded. So I think he has a good understanding of exactly what I need. He said this quote was valid for the life of the project. If it takes 6 months or a year, he's going to hold us to this price. So I'm pretty confident about it. I just feel very strongly about this project. This Harwich Oracle is a paper that there's no other papers, there's no other copies of this anywhere in existence. This stuff is not on Facebook. It's not on Google. You can't get this information anywhere else. And it's really hard to access it, because if you don't know exactly, we have a wall of these things at the library. It's just kind of, it's enormous. So somebody that comes in asking me for something from this time period, I kind of look at them and I'm like, oh boy, do you know exactly what year it is? Because you're going to be plowing through those newspapers. I'm going to have to take them all out, and they're fragile, and I hate doing that. It's just a very unique resource. I feel it's the town history. It's what happened when to whom. It's nowhere else. It's an accurate reflection of what went on at that time period, and I just think it's very unique. Some of the pictures, the digitization, it gives you the pictures as well. This is from the groundbreaking of the community center. You mentioned the Exchange building. I had a reference question not that long ago, was asking me about sort of what happened with the monument and that kind of thing. And it was all in this time period, but it was really hard to figure out because I didn't know what days, there was nothing I could search. And there's nothing on the internet, and it's not in a book. So I just really want to get this thing preserved before it really deteriorates. And it's such a well-used, the 2 previous projects I've done were the Harwich Independent, which was 1872 to 1949, the Central Cape Press. 1949 to 1958. This committee approved those two projects in the past. They're very similar to this. They're heavily used by people at the library every day. I get calls and emails from people all over the country asking me to look stuff up in those products. I look at this stuff, email it to them, they get what they need, everybody's happy. It's an amazing resource. It's heavily used from people all over, so.
Joe?
No questions.
Hold on, Joe.
Sorry,
He's
yeah.
still completing.
Hope,
his-
yeah, and I hope and expect this to be my last question for you. So we've talked about the microfilming, the whole digitization part of it. You've talked about archival boxes, so what happens to that original resource once the project's done? Is it just gonna be stored in the archival boxes? And if so, is there an expectation at some point in time that we may want to further preserve the actual original resource? Because it will continue to deteriorate,
it
as
will.
you know.
Even in an archival box.
Correct, exactly. It slows it down, but it doesn't stop it.
Exactly.
And there are opportunities to stop or significantly reduce the deterioration
Yes.
by using, different preservation books.
Yes. For now, they will be in archival boxes, and they will be put in a place where they are not touched, and that will really significantly reduce the wear and tear. I was actually given some copies of the newspaper that had been in archival boxes at Brooks Academy, and they are much, much older than this, and they look much, much better than this. It's amazing how good the archival boxes do. Mostly it's protecting them from light, but also just from dust and dirt in the environment. So it really does a really good job. Years from now, preserving the paper, that's another whole project.
Sure.
I don't have a lot of experience in that per se, but it could possibly be done at some point. But I think they'll be safe and they'll deteriorate a lot slower in archival boxes.
But the
for
intent
sure.
is to drive users to either any of the media that's created, whether it's the OCR, PDF document, or the microfilm or something like that.
Yes,
correct?
it'll be completely searchable, keyword, very easy to pull up what they need from it.
Thank you.
All set. Jim?
I have no questions.
Kathy?
Just a question, where will the 35 boxes be stored?
At the library. I actually have area in the reference stacks kind of area right now, basically kind of where they are now, which is climate controlled. We're really good at the library about making sure our facilities are working because we have books there and we want everything preserved. There's basically where they are now, they would just be there. They would just be in boxes there instead of being in these little things kind of like that where they're open and exposed to everything.
But
in
the
same-
boxes are not going to be accessible to the public, because we don't want the public
Right.
touching
Right.
newspapers anymore, right?
There's also another room that we still haven't quite figured out, if they would go there. It's kind of hard to figure how big they're gonna be until we actually see them and where exactly they're gonna go. Preferably, we'll have them in basically the staff area in the back room, where our Cahoon paintings are. I don't know if you're familiar with that room, but there's some room back there as well. So we'll try to make room for them there as well.
Okay, that's it.
Dan?
Do you know, does Massachusetts have a state archives office of state archives?
Springfield?
Yeah, there's
They do?
also one in Boston, David.
Because that might be one approach you could take, is to contact the state archives office and see if they'll store those hard copy.
It's
papers.
possible, but we like having them local, I think. That's kind of what I felt with the microfilm. I kind of wanted to have it here in Harwich as opposed to some private company that owns it. You just have more control over what happens to it.
The original document?
Yeah, and the microfilm,
Well, the microfilm, yeah.
yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, if you really want to preserve those,
It
state
could.
archives would probably have the
There's
means
also
to
the
do that.
possibility if the other project that has been discussed with the town and the vault in that area, there might be room there. That's also supposed to be climate controlled and well kept, so I kind of thought of that. One more thing I also wanted to make clear is that there really aren't a lot of other funding sources for this. Nobody wants to do newspapers. We recently joined the Digital Commonwealth, and the Boston Public Library is scanning all of our town annual reports. for free. It's an awesome project. So I've looked into this extensively, and the problem is they just don't take newspapers. They're fragile, they require special handling, and nobody wants to do them. So that's why I'm asking for funding from you guys.
Cindy, can you hold on for a second? I'm watching Joe and he's, go ahead.
I just wanted to offer a response.
Go ahead.
So the Massachusetts State Archives, through the Supervisor of Public Records, will not take municipal documents of any kind for any storage. They used to take ancient and historical documents, but now their directive is that it remains in the municipality. And I agree with you, Jennifer, that what we may want to look at is an opportunity locally, not just with other projects, but if there are other areas where it can be stored. But they will not take any, because it's a third-party document, so to speak, meaning it was a private organization that created it, but it is a holding of the municipality, so based on that, they won't take it.
Thanks, Joe.
Cindy.
I just want a discussion, do we want to ask Michael Monahan if the JPEG step is necessary? It's just over 4,000. Based on,
I think it is. I think it's part of the process. Basically, they're creating an image, and they're using that image to use the software that scans, that does the optical character recognition. So they need the JPEG image to do that. I think it's a standard way of doing it. I think, in other, it might have not have been written out in previous documents, but I think he's thorough, and that's why he put it in there.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you very much for your presentation.
I have to represent real estate and open space tonight. I don't have another person.
Okay. The next one up is OS 11, Cornelius Pond Woodlands Project. Welcome. And you are.
Say your name, please.
We know who Kathy is.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Community Preservation Committee. My name is Michael Locke, the Executive Director of the Harwich Conservation Trust.
And I'm representing Real Estate and Open Space as the current chair. And we're before you looking for CPA funding in support of our endeavor to partnership with HCT to protect this land from potential development. We're seeking 25% of the purchase price for a permanent conservation restriction. Very similar to the situation with the Marini property in terms of seeking a conservation restriction. Questions?
To the board. Cindy.
That was a very good application.
Dan.
I have no questions.
Jim.
Okay, this may not be really a question, but there's one point that I'm a little bit confused on, and that is exactly how the funding is going to flow, because from the application, I got sort of two images of how the $200,000 was going to, sort of be passed through. Now,
Explain that.
Michael, maybe you could explain exactly the mechanics of how the funding is going to work?
Yes, thank you for your question. The goal of this application for Town Community Preservation Act funds, as Kathy mentioned, is to seek voter authorization for $200,000 from the town to the Harwich Conservation Trust for purchase by the town of a permanent conservation restriction. The conservation restriction essentially will be under the care, custody, control of the Town Conservation Commission. So the $200,000 will assist the Harwich Conservation Trust in raising its matching funds toward a total project cost of $850,000. I'm going to break that number down a little bit. That $850,000 total project cost is comprised of $800,000 in land purchase costs and $50,000 in additional project costs, including removal of a deteriorating building, land stewardship project pieces, including establishment of a parking area close to Queen Anne Road, creation of a walking trail loop, creation of a trailhead kiosk with map and other informational items so that people can understand where they are, what they're seeing, what they're visiting. Signage, survey costs, legal costs, closing costs incurred by Harwich Conservation Trust. The CPA funding application is concerned only with funds that will be used for offsetting the purchase, helping with the purchase of the land. Kathy mentioned 25% of the total purchase cost for the land, so 200,000 is 25% of 800,000.
Okay. That partially clarifies it, Michael. So then, let me make sure I understand this correctly. The $200,000 will go towards the purchase by the Harwich Conservation
Yes.
Trust. So, my confusion in the application is it indicated that there would be another purchase by the town of a conservation easement. So, would my understanding be correct that in consideration for that $200,000 contribution for the purchase of the property by Harwich Conservation Trust, the town would then receive
That is correct.
the conservation easement? So there would not be another purchase by the town of the conservation easement as was set out in the application?
It is how you describe. The town
Okay.
will receive a permanent
Okay.
conservation restriction
Okay.
for its contribution of $200,000.
Okay, that's fine. That
Simply
ma-
put.
That makes sense.
Yes.
Now, I just have one other question. The application also referenced the possibility of a $100,000 grant. That is unknown at this point in time. What happens to that $100,000 if the grant is received?
So the town would have to apply for state local acquisition for natural diversity or land grant funds. Municipalities are the only entities eligible for those funds. Municipalities can be reimbursed up to 50% of the town meeting article approved, so up to $100,000 if voters approve, $200,000, of course, if your committee advances the article to town meeting. The $100,000 would then be returned to the open space portion of the Community Preservation Act fund locally.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Joe?
It's going to be a silly question, and it's probably, certainly outside our purview, but it's not going to stop me from asking. So we see the deed document and the reference to the list price and all that stuff. What's the difference, not mathematically, but there's a huge difference between the assessed value and the asking price and the sale price. What happened there? Which I know is every homeowner's question when they go to buy or sell.
Correct.
But I still have to ask, can you speak to that? It just seems like a significant difference between assessed value, asking, and purchase price. Because they all seem to be relevant,
Yeah, the assessed
current
value
to
is
each other.
currently
Yes.
$458.
Well, property assessments are a proxy for calculating property tax. They're not related necessarily to fair market value, what a willing buyer will, what a willing purchaser will acquire from a willing seller. The list price reflects what back in 2015, reflects what the seller's agent, realtor, believed the property could be marketed at. Harwich Conservation Trust worked with the seller's realtor, agent, and arrived at a purchase price of $800,000. The seller needed those funds faster than we could raise them. We turned to another nonprofit, for which I also work, in full disclosure, the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trust. That's a regional nonprofit service bureau helping land trusts and municipalities advance land protection projects. One of the functions that the Compact performs is as a buy and hold agent. So the Compact pre-acquired this property on our behalf to give us a window in which to raise the funds necessary to pay for the purchase. So the compact is holding the property through December 31, 2018, which will hopefully give us enough time to raise the funds. Part of the fundraising effort is this proposed town and Harwich Conservation Trust partnership. The subject of this application, the $200,000 for permanent conservation restriction for the town. Does that help answer your question?
Well,
With the different
it's an
figures?
unfair question. It certainly does, and I think it's helpful. I guess the perspective I'm coming from is, should this make it to town meeting floor, you've got a voter that stands up and sees all this information and says, which again, might be unrelated to what you're looking to do, but would beg the question of, it was only assessed at less than $500,000. Were we, the town, missing out on tax revenue? And now that it's being put into a conservation situation, is the town losing money? Did we lose money by the assessed value? And are we losing future funds, so on and so forth?
I think, and that's a fair question, and one that someone may indeed ask on town meeting floor. When talking to the prior Director of Assessing, David Scannell, about this very question, the answer that I received was that the impact on the taxpayer is fractions of a penny in terms of a property at this kind of value. What I could do is meet with the current assessor to run a calculation to get an understanding of what that might look like for this particular case. But that's the best background I can give you right now. It's fractions of a penny in terms of the actual impact.
And as the first questioner, I'd like to say thank you for that answer. I think that's a great response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else from the board? I have a question. I'm curious about this buy-hold.
Yes.
So the trust has already purchased the property
No.
for $850,000.
No. And that's why your question is helpful, just to expand on this gentleman's questions about the different figures involved, from list price to assessment to appraisal to purchase price. The seller needed their funds quicker than we could raise them. So we wanted it to get off the market so that we didn't lose the opportunity to preserve this 15 acres with over 1,000 feet of shoreline on a pond. It's a very rare occurrence anywhere in town, let alone across the Cape. So we turned to another nonprofit called the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trusts. They have the ability to buy and hold property to give their member land trusts, of which Harwich Conservation Trust is one, to buy and hold property and give land trusts the time, the window in which to raise those funds. So
They execute a purchase and sales agreement?
the compact bought the property.
So they do own the property?
That is
outright?
right. They're
Okay.
holding it while we raise the funds. And then once we raise the funds, we'll essentially buy it from the compact.
Dollar for dollar. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
And they have until December 2018 to complete
Yes.
this.
And what happens if you're unable to raise the funds?
The property then could become available
The
for sale.
compact could
So-
offer it to sale, for sale to a
They'll put it
developer.
up for sale? Okay, all right. That's better. I understand that. Anybody else from the board? Thank you very much for your time and your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, next we have the Cemetery Gravestone Conservation. Mount Pleasant Cemetery.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
So-
Just a point of order, this was scheduled for 7:30. Are we at 7:30 yet?
Well, we did say
I
approximately.
can't tell. It's-
Okay. But I have a concern, since we had this listed in the agenda, that at 7:30, that if there are any members of the public who would be interested in hearing this, they may not show up till 7:30.
We can hold it for a few minutes,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
that's fine,
Should I return or just sit?
Wherever you're comfortable.
wherever you're comfortable.
Hey, how you doing? Good, you know. Excited we were going early. Just excited we were going early.
Would you like to take a break, young lady?
I'm gonna eat a breath mint.
I've got some. if you need.
All right, well, we're pretty close.
Yeah, that was,
Right.
yes. Doesn't have to be tonight. No, that's okay. Thank you.
One thing,
Mr. Chairman, may I make a motion to take a 3-minute recess?
Make the motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Wait a minute, who's seconding?
I am.
Jim,
Because you both said it at the same time. That's the only reason I'm asking, sorry.
all in favor?
Aye.
10-minute recess.
Three.
Three.
I said three.
3-minute recess. Sorry.
I'll be right back.
Sorry, when everybody says second at the same
Yeah,
time,
I understand.
I'd have to ask. Yes.
We can get clarification of the numbers for the library.
you mean they can come back to us with some?
No, the financial director can give us clarification on those. We can have now.
Why would she have the numbers?
I have no idea, young lady.
Well, I'm still concerned about, you know, a maintenance plan for our historic buildings.
We may be on a break.
Yep, I'm on a break.
Would,
No, thanks, I'm good.
Jim, okay.
I would have shared mine, but they didn't look, they've been in a hot car. They did not look good in mine.
You want one of mine? Go ahead.
No, I already have one.
Okay.
So we don't have a real amount from this.
It wasn't on the application.
I did do up the other drafts. I'll ship them to you and then I'll ship them to Deb.
Okay.
At this point, they're red draft because somebody might.
The only one that was.
I'm not posting it.
No, I know, the only thing that we need to add, not an application, but it's
Housekeeping.
no, the fourth night of presentations, which is December 14th. We have 2 presentations that evening.
Right.
And
I have a
we're,
little red B.
right, another agenda item, and it's actually gonna be a presentation, is that the Yarmouth Housing Trust, people are gonna come and give us a presentation.
On their house sharing.
No, on the housing
just-
trust.
I've got you.
We're trying to get, they're trying to model this one after some similarities. So we're trying to get clarification, and they were gracious enough to come. So all I'm saying is that will go on as
We have the real wording. I'll send
yeah.
it to you.
Yeah.
I've already got a little red B because I knew we'd have,
Yeah,
somebody
he's got
might
it.
have to,
Yeah.
you know, rejig their appearance and,
Well, so far, so good.
or come back with their documentation.
Everybody.
I know you are. Okay, we're still missing 2. You okay?
Mm-hmm.
You sorry I asked those questions?
No, not at all.
It just, I had them pointed
No,
out, so.
not at all, not at all. That's fine. feelings about this,
Which
you know,
one?
this whole thing?
Here's when we
Oh,
go to Texas.
I have
so
none.
often.
And I'll tell you why
Okay.
later.
Word. What are the
Seven-
ages?
7, 6, and just over 18 months.
Adorable.
And they all have their own
Of
personalities.
course.
Oh. This one especially, Mallory.
So far, so good.
And the middle child.
Oh, that's
That's
to
rare.
be determined.
Oh.
I'm ready to
Oh,
go as
good.
soon as
Although she is showing signs.
Jim gets back. We can start without him, we have a quorum.
Nothing wrong with that. I'm a be one myself. I hate to admit it. It's a precious quality.
Going by that clock.
I'm not going by that, I'm going by this clock.
Your son or
I
your
haven't eaten
daughter?
dinner yet.
And do you have any other kids?
And I have a daughter, and she has
By the way, I'm
2.
having problems opening your attachments.
Where do they live?
I don't know why.
You're all.
What office do you have?
Hey,
What year?
good way to get away in the winter.
It's a brand new,
We go to Texas.
it's a brand new computer. Okay, everybody's back, we're ready to proceed.
Same.
Gotta do it.
Okay.
You have the floor.
I'm Robin Kelly, I'm the cemetery administrator, and I am asking for $47,000 for the restoration of the stones in Mount Pleasant Cemetery. Over the last 6 months, I have indexed all 350 grave sites that are on the left-hand side if you're coming up from the golf course, which are the older lots in the cemetery. A little less than 2,000 stones. So I photographed all of them, indexed them, and concluded that 42 monuments are in need of repair due to fractures. 108 monuments are either have foundation repairs or need to be reset. The monuments are leaning, and if they don't have any treatment, they'll topple over, and it's costs a lot more money when that happens. There's some gravestones that need to be cleaned. There is a lot of lichen if you've been down there and you've seen the stones. So I have included all the pictures in a layout in my application, so you can see the map of the older lots. I color-coded it. The ones that are in blue are the ones that are in need of, they're either leaning or listing. The ones that are in yellow are the ones that are already fractured and need repair. And then if you go and you continue on, they're all indexed by, I didn't want to put a bid out and say, we need to fix 42 stones, and then they wouldn't know which stones needed to be repaired. So then as you go through the application, you'll see they're all listed by street, the lot owner, the name on the stone that needs to be repaired. I had contacted 3 different preservationists. I had 2 of them give me verbal quotes over the phone. One is actually coming down next week. I also had Henry T. Crosby and Son did give me a quote, which is the price that I'm asking. He was higher than the other guy that's a preservationist who's coming down next week, but he didn't want to give me a solid, firm price until he actually came and walked. I mean, I emailed them all of this documentation, but wanted to walk the property just to see. He thought his estimate was really going to be more like 39,000. Tommy's is 47. I will be going out to bid a month before town meeting, so the worst case possible number would be 47, so I put that in there, but that, it might not be that. So I might be getting a new price from this guy next week, so I will let you know if the price changes and it drops. I'll try to go with obviously, the lowest price. They're both preservationists, and they both do a lot of preservation work, and I hope you will support this project.
Questions from the board? Cindy?
No questions for me.
Dan?
Could you redefine again what the blue ones represent? what the
Okay,
yellow
so
ones represent?
when you go through, on the blue ones are the ones that are leaning or listing. So the stones are either like, they're starting to list, or their foundations are cracked, and the foundations need to be repaired, which happens a lot. Either if there was the ground settling from from the caskets or whatever decomposing or whatever, the ground starts to shift in cemeteries. It happens a lot. A lot of times when that happens, when the ground shifts, the foundations move, and then they ended up cracking or listing. And if you don't straighten them up, they'll end up falling, toppling over, and then they'll crack into several pieces.
And the yellow one?
The yellow ones are actual ones that actually have fractures. So if you look at some of the pictures, you can actually see the fractures in the stones. They used to put metal pins in monuments when they set them, and as the water gets in them, they'll expand and contract, and then they'll freeze, and then they'll crack the stone. So there's quite a few of them that have fractures. That you can see that they spider up the stone.
Thank you.
Kathy?
Does this represent the whole cemetery?
No, it only represents the older section. So the cemetery, if you looked where the mausoleum is, to the left going towards the golf course, the lots that are located on the right-hand side after the mausoleum going towards the shed is the newer section, and most of the stones in that area are too new.
So in terms of total, what does this represent in terms of percent of the total?
It's a half of Mount Pleasant. So it's half, it's the half that if you were to drive into Mount Pleasant, it's the older section, and most of the gravestones in this area are from the 1800s. There's some from the early 1900s going up to, probably, I would say 1910, 1920 tops. The other section is kind of like a newer section that they opened, and most of the graves on that side are relatively, in the last 100 years.
And then repairs, like repairs of fractures or cracks, are they done on the spot?
Yes, they're done right there they don't remove the stones and then bring them back. They
So
actually.
I would imagine that that's weather permitting also in terms of seasonal?
Well, as long as it's not, they probably just couldn't do it in January and February. I think they could probably do it any other time of the year, just not when it's completely frozen. Because a lot of times they have to reset the monument anyways, because there's usually some reason behind it. So 9 times out of 10, they're probably gonna have to put down a new foundation with cement, put the stone on top of it to make sure it's level. And when they remove the stone to put the cement foundation, they just can't dig the cement foundation when the ground is frozen. So it would have to be not frozen, the ground.
Okay. And in 2010, when you had applied for the 53,000 for the other cemetery.
Right.
And part of the initial slowness of the start of the project was because all this had to be done. Is this very similar?
Yes.
Okay,
So
that's what I thought.
It was a lesson learned. So this time I actually went and I took the map, went and indexed every single stone. It was actually good for me because then I got to make sure that I had indexed everyone's name from every single lot. Many people call me every day and say, I'm looking for so-and-so in the cemetery, and I don't have a record of them. Not because they probably didn't get buried legally or anything, it's just because it slipped through the cracks. This way I'm indexing all of the cemeteries. I'm actually gonna index all of the cemeteries, so I'm trying to make a book just like the one that's in Dennis, so.
Well, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is.
Could you fill that number in for me? I wasn't around when that happened. Jim?
Okay, just one question. I do appreciate the fact that you're going to get another estimate and that you would provide us with that estimate.
Yeah,
Hopefully, that would be a little bit lower.
Yeah.
But I noticed that you do not have a detailed budget with your application. So I was wondering if when you get that other estimate, you could get a more detailed budget to submit to us?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I know that Tommy is gonna give me a more detailed quote as well with all of it, because the one that he gave me was just a quick, I said,
Right.
I need to come up with a number, I needed a number for you guys, so. I know that Jonathan Arpel, who has done a lot of preservation work on the Cape, he did the town of Sandwich, he did the town of Eastham. He is the one who's gonna be coming and doing a quote for me coming up as well. He's also running a preservation workshop for me here in one of our cemeteries coming up this spring.
Yeah, well, a more detailed budget would be very helpful in our
Okay.
deliberations. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's it.
Joe?
Thank you. So this was a private cemetery back in the day, correct?
Yes.
And when was it transferred to the care, custody, and control of town? Was it the 1970s?
I think it was 1975, I believe, November.
Yeah,
It
based
might
on-
be November 9th, actually.
Yikes. So was there ever perpetual care related to these lots or
Yes.
since then?
Yes.
Is this something that could be handled by perpetual care, or is that more the maintenance around the lots?
Perpetual care, usually we can only expend the interest in the perpetual care account anyways. The perpetual care usually is something that we use if something is damaged or it can only be used for kind of maintenance issues on small scales, not like this is more of a preservation.
Sure.
Yeah.
And part of that is because you can only spend
The interest.
the interest, right?
Right.
All right, thank you.
Anything else from the board? One suggestion, any documentations you have for the board,
Okay.
would you give them to Sandy?
To Sandy, yes, absolutely.
So- And then she'll make sure it gets to either the chair or the vice chair.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
What's that recess again for?
It's all my fault, David. It's all my fault, David.
We were too good in our planning.
Mr. Chair, are you seeking a filibuster?
Does anybody on the board have anything they want to discuss about the schedule? Any conflicts, any issues? Everybody's good. That's good, we'll have a quorum.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, based on that, so we have the three meetings coming up this year. We've also heard confirmed January 4th, just not the location. Is that correct? And then have we built out beyond January 4th at this point?
We have a regularly scheduled one on January 11th.
Regular one, yep,
Right.
that's right, too, thank you.
The calendar, Sandy buys a calendar, and then we get to sign up.
Interesting way of doing it.
She didn't have it last time I was in, which was last week?
All right, we'll take another 6-minute recess.
So should the new
So,
agendas have
well, I'm
approximate
just,
on there?
well, what Jim was saying is that maybe we should put on the next agenda, use not
What do we
earlier
need
than?
for flexibility?
Yeah, basically what we do on the planning board is we set a time that we cannot go before, but we can go after. So the way we put it on the agenda, it's not earlier than. And then we can't start before
Those
that
dimples?
time.
Yeah.
But if the previous one goes longer, we can start
love it.
after that time.
I bet you,
You know,
she's lucky she
maybe
got
we
your-
should just
your-
leave it
all your
be,
grandkids are lucky.
because,
Well, you know what?
you know,
There's
it's
nothing
hard
better
to
than a
tell.
grandparent.
You know, somebody's gonna go
And
over
maybe a
or
dad. Oh,
whatever. I mean,
definitely, you're right.
unfortunately, I mean, this is great. I mean, I did also try to
Spitting
do
image.
that when I was putting the groups together.
Yeah, no, you did a good
In
job.
terms
then
of how much I
I'm
thought there was
actually,
gonna be of
Some decided they
brother
didn't want
potential
the time
has
period.
moved back
of
from
some potential
California to Connecticut.
input,
Right.
Can't sell the house,
Yeah,
so
and you have to be
market's so
prepared.
bad
Yeah.
and they can't find renters.
Okay.
And I have a nephew, they have one son, Patrick, who's actually in Ottawa at a hockey academy. And my dad and I are gonna go next weekend to visit my brother and sister-in-law. And my sister-in-law, who's another Cindy, emailed and said, Patrick's gonna actually be there, because he's gotta try out for Connecticut hockey, and, so I haven't
I'd like-
seen Patrick in
Excuse
years.
me, I'd like to
16.
remind the board members that we are online until the meeting ends. So,
Dave was saying that he was having
I go
problems
to-
opening up my
For Christmas,
attachments.
I'll fly
When
out to
AOL,
Ottawa, where Patrick happens
sends
to be,
them.
he'll be in Connecticut.
would everyone prefer it in a PDF
Where my
format?
sister and her family
that might be
are.
preferable.
And I'll see my niece,
If you
but I
can do
get to
that.
spend the summer with my
Yeah.
niece.
I send it in as a docs, but
Patrick is coming,
maybe,
or next weekend, it'll be great.
I mean, I have a
Years.
brand new version of Office. You have I mean,
That-
both
that-
of ours are new.
Yeah,
What?
they're fun.
I'm sure it's with Verizon and AOL, to be really honest, that's my
Well, it's funny because
nemesis.
I got a timestamp on one of the emails, and you saw that, and we couldn't understand.
And mine says it went the 12th.
Well, I'll tell you what
killing
we
me.
do on the planning board,
Let's see.
David, in order to
Sent.
deal with that problem. We do send out the agendas and all the backup information electronically, but then we also send it out by mail.
That's interesting.
So that way, if there is an electronic failure, somebody at least gets a hard copy in the mail. So our meetings are on Tuesday. Generally, the mailing will go out the Thursday before the meeting. And most of us get it on Saturday, some get it on Monday, but everybody tends to get it in a timely manner, get the hard copy in a timely manner, so that if the electronic doesn't work for any reason, then at least everybody has hard copy.
But everybody could notify Jan if they don't receive the electronic copy, right?
Well, not if they don't how would they even know
Well,
that
her
Jan?
emails go
No,
through.
no, how would, if the email doesn't get through, how would we even know
See,
that Jan
that's,
sent it?
that came through on my Verizon.
Oh, the email,
And-
not,
And I'm
not
talking
the
about the town
attachments.
Yeah.
website. Wouldn't,
Oh.
we already had a time difference between when she sent them and when
Really?
I received them.
Yeah.
Well, this is that message on October 12th.
Right, we've already been through this,
Yeah,
right?
but I mean, this
I
says,
understand.
this is my sent file of, this is Verizon's AOL mail to Gmail. And this says, I sent it on the 12th.
Right.
And this was after the town wanted to report. So it went good, well, whatever. So I don't know why you didn't, and I saw that that's when you received it. So it's like in no man's land for
When they talk in
weeks.
computers, they talk about the land, it being in the land. They're not kidding. All
What
right,
do we got?
49.
Which is why I called you.
I think we're pretty good, don't you think, 7:48? Is that
That's
good, Jim?
7:49.
Oh, let's wait the extra minute.
Okay.
Well, who has Comcast? Does anybody have Comcast?
Yeah, I do.
And do you love it? Do you have any conductivity issues? No? Okay. I
Not that
never
I'm
had
aware
any
of.
Not yet.
I could have a lot of issues that I'm not even aware of, you know?
But the other day Comcast was down nationwide. Did
Yeah.
you hear about that?
No.
No.
Yeah. they
That's
had a
happened a few
nationwide-
times.
Because we had a system issue at work, and then our IT folks, we have an outside.
When you hear it's nationwide, you go, okay, so you were hacked and,
You're like,
you know,
I wish.
Okay, we're going to continue
excuse.
with the meeting. Next up, Brooks Park Improvement Phase 5.
You guys sick of seeing me yet?
Could you identify yourselves, please?
I'm Eric Beebe, I'm the Recreation Director.
Frank Riley, Vice Chair of the Rec Commission.
So yeah, this is Phase 5. We've come to you guys for 4 other phases, and we're really looking to finish what we started. This is the final phase for what we were planning in our original vision of the park. And this is it's not the most glamorous phase we have, but it's a necessity at this point. It's to change all the lighting. There's currently 11 light poles, to change it all to LED lighting in the park. The reason that we're looking to do this is a couple things. The current lights are no longer, they're at the end of their useful life. They still work, but sporadically and not well. There's a lot of maintenance that has to be done on the bulbs, replacement on the bulbs. The poles are rotting, they're wooden poles. So it's something, as we go further and further, we're gonna put more and more money into this to keep it up. The second thing is it's actually impeding what we'd like to be able to do there at night. because of the first 4 phases, it's been hugely successful and thriving. We have tons of people there all the time, the new parking lot, the pavilion, everything that we've gotten through CPC funds, the pickleball courts. We have over 200 people signed up for pickleball, I believe.
Close to 300.
Yeah. So it's been great, and we just want to expand that as much as we can. And with that is, we want to have night pickleball, which we do, but it's not used as much as it could be because of the sporadic functionality of the lights as they stand now. There's also possibilities for nighttime basketball leagues for the high school kids. We looked into roller hockey on the basketball court, all things that we could do at night or even this time of year in the late afternoon when it starts getting dark. Some of the big benefits for switching over to the LED. Number one is it's a big, substantial price tag right off the bat. But we have to look at down the line, and it's going to reduce our electric costs by 80%, our electric bills at the park. It also reduces the ambient light by 50%, which is big for any abutters or neighbors or anything there for light pollution purposes. It's actually going to reduce the number of poles. We're going to light more areas, but reduce the number of poles. Currently, it's 11 poles. This would bring it down to 7 poles. It would light everything, the pickleball courts, tennis court, both basketball courts. A new thing is it would light the playground. It would also light the new parking lot as well as the old one in front of the tennis courts. So it actually covers more ground with less ambient light, with less poles. Also, a big thing is the company that we have been talking to that we got the quote from, and most others also offer 25-year full maintenance plans. So there's 0 maintenance costs going forward for at least 25 years. So that would include bulbs, ballasts, anything, any maintenance to do with the poles, any fixtures, or even the remote access. That's another big benefit is it would change the whole control panel, whereas you'd still have manual access to turn the lights on with a button and have timers. We'd also have remote access. So it could be through a cell phone or my computer at work. I can set my own timer for it to turn off at a certain time. If nobody's in town and it's 8 o'clock on a Monday night and I'm at home in Yarmouth and somebody calls me and says they're trying to get to use the lights but something's wrong with the button, I can go on my phone and turn the lights on for them. So that's a huge benefit. And like I said, it would open up more possibilities for us for programming at night. The older kids tend to want to play nighttime basketball, things like that. We want to look into like summer basketball leagues, night leagues. Those are real popular. We just think it'll open up everything and really wrap up our project as a whole, because it's been great. The public love it. The attendance of the park is way through the roof, and this benefits not just the active users of the park, but the passive ones too. I know passive recreation is a big thing, and that's why we came up with the pavilion. Benches, we're getting benches put in. This would light that up, gives people, they could come have a picnic at night. A company could book it for a nighttime event, and it'd be lit. All the parking lots are lit, safety-wise. So it's, we're really trying to wrap it up and just finish what we started. I assume there's 0 questions.
We'll start with Joe this time.
Well, you're kind of right. Not really a question, but to me, a comment that I think it is remarkable to talk about reducing the number of poles, increasing the lit area, and at the same time reducing the ambient glare.
Yep.
I think that's a great concept and selling point.
Yep, and the LED lights, the ones they make now are just, they could focus on an area without all the glare. Yep.
Thank you.
Jim?
Eric, you know me better than that. I just have one question for you.
Sure.
Could you just please explain your opinion with regard to how lighting comes under one of the allowed uses
for CPC recreational funds, which are the acquisition, creation, preservation, rehabilitation, and/or restoration of land for recreational use.
Well, you know, what we've been doing with the park as a whole is kind of, I guess you could call it rehabilitating the land to make it more useful for recreational purposes, whether it be pickleball courts, basketball courts, and this is just the final part of that, the final piece of the puzzle to aid that, to really fully encompass what we can do there recreationally. Includes daytime and nighttime. So to kind of complete that circle, this is the last piece for us.
Okay, thank you, Eric.
Yep.
And
That's
the
all
town of Dennis did the same lighting. It cost them a little over $400,000, and it was done under CPC a couple of years ago, Johnny Kelly Park,
Yep.
Dennis.
Thank you. That's it.
Kathy?
You know, when we review these applications, usually we ask that you kind of go before other commissions, committees, whoever, to, you know, sort of at least fly the project in front of them. And I note that this says that we will be doing all this stuff. So you haven't gone before the Board of Selectmen or have had a public meeting?
We haven't gone to the Board of Selectmen yet. I believe the town administrator presented a lot of these projects to the Board of Selectmen. As far as a public meeting, we're going to be at our November commission meeting. Part of our commission meeting is going to be a public meeting for anybody that wants to come and give us any suggestions or any comments at all. Any other boards, or, you know, we work with a lot of different departments. The highway department they help us out in everything we do with projects. The only other thing, we'll be getting an abutters list, like we usually do for any projects there, which is a very minimal list, but we will follow through on that so they know what we're doing as well.
It would be great if you could just send something back to this committee after the November meeting about any public comment.
Sure.
Eric, you mentioned that you're going to save about 80% of your electricity bill. Do you know what that is in terms of dollars?
I don't know exactly the exact amount, and a
guesstimate.
I'd say we'd be saving between $5,000 and $7,000 a year in electric costs.
Our electric bills right now are not really reflective of the real cost, because half the time the lights aren't working.
Yeah, we can't get them to work. Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Cindy?
Are there, like, we private payers of utilities pay our bills, and we're offered energy audits, et cetera, et
Yep.
cetera. And I don't know if a municipality is at the same, but have you talked to the Cape Light Compact about any incentives?
We did. We talked to the Cape Light Compact, and the lights aren't used, the lights wouldn't be and aren't used enough to qualify for a lot of the grants that they would use, like street lights would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Quick.
Okay, under old business, I have a question about the application. Do you all have your initial applications in front of you? Under the project selection criteria.
You're talking about the blank application.
Right. It says specifically, the CPC requires that all project applications be reviewed with the appropriate towns, committee, boards, commissions. Is that accurate? Because at one point, when I was reviewing the CPC documentation, as I understood it, it was a recommendation from CPC, not a requirement. Yet, in our application, we have it as a requirement. Should that be changed?
Well,
Not now, obviously.
No, I did think that Dan had offered to review the application, and that we were gonna discuss it, you know, like after February
After the
1.
first, okay.
And we could address some of these specific inconsistencies, I guess.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned to you, David, the last time, once we go through all the applications and vote on them, then I'm gonna go take whatever input you folks have that you learned from this year's sessions and make comments, and I'm looking to really, how shall I say, streamline the application, eliminate some unnecessary stuff. We're gonna have to add a section that talks about our policies.
Which have to be developed. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's my project for next year.
That's great. Glad you're doing it. Anything else under old business? Anything else under other? Next meetings.
Well, may I just add, I
Go ahead, Susan.
believe, because Mary's in the audience, that I'm happy to announce that Housing Committee has identified a nominee that's yet to be confirmed for the CPC, part of our vacant seats, so.
Okay.
That was agreed upon on Monday. More of an announcement.
Okay.
Was that the 5th, the 6th?
All right, so are we all set on the timeframes, the upcoming timeframes? Any questions?
We next meet November 30th.
Yep.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's an adjournment.